So I will go over some of the changes in substance use fairly quickly, and then the major change, of course, is the addition of behavioral addictions to the category right now. In the past, we had three categories for each drug of abuse: use, abuse, and dependence. Some drugs could have dependence and some could not. So now we're going to take all of those away and have only use. So there will no longer, and the rationale, there were two important issues here. One is that abuse, it turns out, is a gray area between use and dependence that it's very, very hard to define. So I think that was the easier decision for the group, to say, well, instead of saying that somebody has abuse as opposed to use, there are going to be a kind of checklist of aspects of addictive behavior. And so you may have use with many aspects of addictive behavior or fewer aspects, rather than the clinician just arbitrarily deciding what was use and what was abuse. The second issue is that there's been a long-standing disagreement about what to call the most severe form of substance use disorders. I found an article from 2010 that was great by O'Brien that gave a history of that. And he said that even when the discussions were going on about addictive disorders in DSM-3, there was a disagreement about whether it should be called dependence, severe addiction, or it should be called addiction. And the feeling was that addiction was too pejorative, so it was called dependence by a very narrow vote, and which meant that forevermore dependence and addiction were conflated. Now, dependence, the concept of dependence, has very specific meanings in pharmacology. It involves when somebody has to take more of a medication, or there's tolerance to get the old effect. When they stop taking the drug, there's a withdrawal syndrome. Whereas addiction is more of a behavioral concept. It involves compulsive drug seeking, craving, entering dangerous situations and illegal behavior in order to continue getting the drug. The conflation of these two concepts in the DSM means that a lot of people like me who've worked in the chronic pain area have had to have discussions with our clients about what does it mean to be dependent on an opiate that you've had to take for a long time for your incurable pain situation versus being an addict. And it's led many people who have incurable pain, like intractable pain in cancer or incurable back pain, to be very anxious about taking medications, not because of concerns about dependence, but out of concerns of being an addict. So this is changing now. So there's no longer going to be a dependence category, so it will just be use, with the severity of use being based on criteria of checking off various cut points. Another thing is that legal difficulties as a criteria are being taken out because it is so associated with SES that someone with fairly high SES can get away with fairly severe drug use without legal consequences. The concept of drug craving is being added. Now I want to talk about gambling because that is just so important. It's been found that there's a very high comorbidity between substance abuse and gambling in many family and epidemiological studies. Also, the treatments are fairly similar. You have Gamblers Anonymous and you have Alcoholics Anonymous. Of course, that doesn't mean that they should be the same diagnosis, because you also have Overeaters Anonymous that's not in this category. The idea that a behavior could be grouped with substance abuse diagnoses is very controversial. When I first heard it, I thought this just doesn't make sense, because I understand the idea of ingesting a substance. I don't understand the idea of why ingesting a substance should be in the same category as doing something in a addictive way. And I certainly was afraid that it would open up it would open up a Pandora's box of, my chocolate addiction, your addiction to watching Big Bang Theory. So the work group considered this very closely for quite a long time, and they decided that among all the potential addictions to consider, which included, I'll go over that in a second, they decided that gambling was the one that really belonged in a related category to substance abuse. There is believed that there are common pathways in the brain, a pathway that begins in the midbrain that goes to the frontal lobe, that is underlined with, it's called the mesolimbic and mesocortical system, that you will see these light up among people with severe drug problems and also gambling problems. And it's not the case, it's very possible that some other behavioral addictions will join this in future versions of the DSM-5, but there just isn't as much proof yet that make people feel comfortable doing that. So some of the other ones that have been considered were sex addiction, internet gaming addiction, food addiction, sexual addiction, shopping addiction. The only one of those that's going to be in the DSM-5 will be in Section 3, areas requiring more research, and that's going to be internet gaming addiction, because it seems to have qualities of addiction behaviors that looks a lot like gambling. What else do I want to say about gambling? It's going to be called gambling disorder as opposed to pathological gambling, which was what it was called in prior versions. Just felt that pathological gambling was too pejorative.